Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Americas. Coming up, joy and despair on the Mexican-American border. Happy vaccinated shoppers traipse back and forth, while migrants trying to reach the U.S. are forced to wait out their immigration hearings in Mexico. Then the parliament in Chile approves same-sex marriage, one of the few Latin American countries to do so. That new legislation also lets same-sex couples adopt. And after the U.S. dipped into its emergency oil reserves, Canada is doing something similar with, wait for it, maple syrup. I'm Jeannie Godula. Hope for migrants trying to reach the United States was shattered this week as the U.S. resumed a Trump-era program to send them back to Mexico. U.S. President Joe Biden had tried to end that policy as part of a more humanitarian approach to migration, but federal courts ordered a reboot of the so-called migrant protection protocols, which require asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for U.S. immigration hearings. Well, that comes in stark contrast to the joy seen at the border between Mexico and California, since it was reopened to fully vaccinated people last month. Here's more from our correspondents on the ground.
The largest border post between the United States and Mexico is operating fully again in Tijuana. Over 100,000 tourists cross the border every day. Many Mexicans go shopping on the other side.
Clothes, shoes, brands, everything we can't find in the shops in Mexico. We've been waiting in line for a while. It's been 2 hours. Everything's the same as it was.
The long lines don't bother the street vendors at all. Victor is native to southern Mexico, but he moved to Tijuana to make a living. For a few days, he started selling churros on the border again.
I make more money than at a factory. Now that the border has reopened, there is more traffic. That means more income for us.
The reopening of the border also allows families to meet again after a long separation.
We are visiting one of my sisters. We haven't seen her for 2 years. I'm taking my father and my mother to see her too.
But migrants are entirely set aside from this excitement at the border. This shelter hosts 72 people, most Mexicans, waiting to enter the United States. In recent months, Father Patricio received more and more newcomers.
Every day people knock at the door seeking shelter or asylum, and we must give them the bad news. Asylum doesn't exist at the moment.
Because the United States keeps deporting migrants under Title 42, a health measure that Donald Trump took when the pandemic started. Rosa, Marco, and their 2 children paid its price. They left the state of Michoacan, threatened by a criminal group. In the United States, when they sought asylum, U.S. authorities discharged them.
We stayed one day and they deported us. Title 42 is discriminating against people. People who need help are contagious, but those who go and spend their money aren't.
The family has been here for 3 months and has no other choice but to wait for an easing of U.S. policies.
We want to go back and apply for asylum again, to try another time. We want to have the chance, at least, to be heard.
For now, Title 42 keeps every hope at bay for migrants. The border is closed whether they are vaccinated or not.
We don't know when they'll reopen it. We protested and wrote open letters to Joe Biden for him to make a decision, because people need a decision.
As migration flows have reached record levels on the continent, the United States just restarted the Remain in Mexico program, which projects to deport migrants awaiting regularization.
Here's a wrap now of some other big news stories out of the U.S. this week. As the Omicron variant pushes through the states, New York City expanded its COVID-19 mandates. Vaccine requirements are now in place for children as young as 5 years old and for workers at all private sector companies. Also this week, though, a federal judge in Georgia issued a nationwide injunction that prevents the U.S. government from enforcing a COVID-19 vaccine mandate on federal contractors. Now, that temporarily shuts down the last remaining vaccine requirement by the Biden administration. A third woman to accuse Ghislaine Maxwell of grooming her for abuse by the late financier Jeffrey Epstein testified this week at the British socialite's criminal trial in New York. The witness said she gave Epstein sexual massages when she was just 14 years old. The 59-year-old Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to 8 counts of sex trafficking and other charges. Her lawyers claim she's only being prosecuted because Epstein killed himself in jail. And former Empire actor Jussie Smollett defended himself in court this week. He's accused of lying to police in Chicago about being the victim of an anti-gay racist attack. 2 brothers were arrested for that alleged attack. They told police the actor orchestrated the hoax. If convicted, Smollett would likely be placed on probation and eventually ordered to perform community service. But he says the allegations have already ruined his career. Now, some 30 countries around the world have already legalized gay marriage, but just a handful of them are in Latin America. Those include Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, and now Chile can be added to that list. People there celebrated this week as the Chilean Congress voted to legalize same-sex marriage and adoption, a decision that now needs to be signed by the president, who backs the law. James Vecina reports.
Cheers erupt inside the Chilean parliament as lawmakers approve same-sex marriage. First given the green light by the Senate, the lower chamber of deputies voted overwhelmingly for a change in the law, with 82 ballots cast in favour and 20 against.
It's a historic day, and it's the result of years of fighting and a lot of effort to not only change the law, but create cultural change too.
The bill was first presented to Congress back in 2017 by former President Michelle Bachelet. And while for the past 4 years it's been met with resistance from the ruling Conservative Party, the bill received a majority yes vote in every step of the process in an opposition-dominated Congress. President Sebastián Piñera, who'll leave office in March, is expected to sign it into law. Up until now, same-sex couples could register a civil partnership, but they'll now be able to marry and adopt children.
The UK and Australia have now joined the US in the so-called diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. The allies have had a series of disagreements with China that have plunged relations to their lowest point since the Tiananmen Square crackdown of 1989. And even though US diplomats are among those who won't be in China for the Games, American athletes will still be able to compete.
After months of squabbling over how to position themselves, the United States have made it clear. No US officials will be travelling to the Beijing Winter Olympic Games in February.
The athletes on Team USA have our full support. We will be behind them 100% as we cheer them on from home, but we will not be contributing to the fanfare of the Games. U.S. diplomatic or official representation would treat these Games as business as usual in the face of the PRC's egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang.
At the centre of the decision, concerns over China's treatment of its Uyghur and other Muslim minorities in the country. And prior to the announcement, Beijing vowed to respond firmly to a boycott.
Without being invited, American politicians keep hyping the so-called diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics, which is merely grandstanding. Political manipulation is a blatant insult of the spirit of the Olympic Charter and an outright political provocation. It seriously offends the 1.4 billion Chinese people.
A new low in Chinese-American relations. But over the past weeks, pressure hasn't only come from Washington. While Xi Jinping is hoping that the Games will showcase China's economic and technological strength, he's faced international pressure over the whereabouts of tennis player Peng Shuai, who vanished after accusing the country's former vice premier of sexual abuse. And if Team USA will still be allowed to compete in the Winter Games, Washington may look to see whether other countries will follow their diplomatic boycotts.
Next to our number of the week, 900. That's the number of people from one company who were fired on the very same Zoom call. Vishal Garg, the CEO of mortgage firm Better.com, announced the brutal cuts in the run-up to Christmas. The backlash has spiraled against him after the mass firing was later uploaded to social media. A bit more bad news for you now, but this one does have a silver lining. A difficult harvest last spring means the world could now be facing a dramatic shortage of maple syrup. But fear not. Quebec in Canada actually has the world's only strategic reserve of everyone's favorite pancake topping. Canada is now releasing more than half of that stock to avoid what might have been a very sticky situation. Charles Pellegrin digs in for more.
The unexpected encounter between the pandemic and climate change leads us here, to the Global Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve. Stay-at-home orders led to the demand for the sweet condiment soaring, but an unexpectedly short winter has curtailed the maple harvest this year. The nectar of the north is made from the sap of maple trees, which flows only when freezing and thawing temperatures alternate between night and day. Eager to keep supply in line with demand, the Quebec Maple Syrup Producers Association is putting over 22 million kilos of its rainy day syrup stash on the market. The organization and its strategic reserve are often compared to OPEC, the global oil cartel, a comparison which shows that for Quebec, which produces close to 3/4 of global supply, maple syrup is serious business.
It represents $800 million of Canada's GDP. Over 12,000 people in Quebec work in this industry. And beyond the fact that maple syrup is now exported in over 60 countries around the world, it's part of our culture.
The industry is heavily regulated, with a centralized quota system to manage output and keep prices high. But in years to come, increasingly erratic weather patterns could have an impact on production. The industry will have to adapt.
Nowadays, technology allows us to get more sap out of each maple tree. That's where we're at. It all starts with Mother Nature, but on our end with technology, we're able to ensure more profitability. At the end of the day, the freezing and thawing of the sap is essential to the process.
In the meantime, the association has approved 7 million new taps over the next 3 years to bolster production, and so that people are maple to enjoy their pancakes.
That wraps it up for this Inside the Americas. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next time for all the news from north to south.